You've often heard me refer to social media as brain poison. You've often heard me refer to social media as a hate machine. You've often heard me say that social media are the biggest culprit in the wholesale ruination of our public discourse. And yesterday, I think we saw perhaps the most elegant, most instructive, most self-contained object lesson in just how manifestly true and accurate those assertions really are. As you may have noticed, late yesterday morning, we started seeing these big, bold, breathlessly hysterical headlines about these horrible racist monsters from the Border Patrol who were riding around on horses, whipping and lassoing these poor, innocent Haitian illegals who are just trying to flee oppression and claim asylum in the United States. You know, the same United States that they're always telling us is shot through with racism and xenophobia and the original sin of white supremacy, so it seems odd that so many black foreigners want to come live here, but never mind. That's not important now. No one knows for sure which idiot on Twitter it was who first concocted this fantasy about these horse-mounted white supremacist Border Patrol devils, over 80% of whom are Latino, but never mind. That's not important now. A riding and a roping and a whipping, but once that person clicked the send button, once those words entered the ecosystem of the Twitter brain poison hate machine, you know exactly what happened from there. Because posting one little nugget of hate on Twitter, even if it's a completely made-up fever dream from a diseased mind of a deranged, derelict dumbass, once that delicious little nugget of hate is out there, once it starts circulating, it's like walking into an NA meeting, throwing a kilo of cocaine down on the table and saying, "You guys do whatever you want. I'll be back in a couple hours." Everybody in the room knows they shouldn't partake. They know only bad things will result if they do partake. But there's no chance they aren't going to do it. And so it is with social media hate mongering, which for all intents and purposes is the digital cocaine of the 21st century. As soon as this one silly tweet was out there, oh boy, it was off to the races. Every idiot on Twitter was snorting up that sweet hate until they looked like Tony Montana in that one scene from Scarface, and you know exactly what scene I'm talking about. The person who first concocted this story and posted that first idiotic tweet, that person has probably never ridden a horse. They've probably never met someone who's ever ridden a horse. Hell, they've probably never even seen a movie in which someone rode a horse. Because if you've ever ridden a horse, or met someone who's ridden a horse, or even seen a film in which horse riding is depicted, then you know that taking the reins in one hand, making a loop, and gently striking the horse on the flanks is one of the ways in which a horseman instructs his mount on what he wants the animal to do. It's been a basic, elemental aspect of the equine arts ever since the invention of the bit and the bridle, which was so many thousands of years ago. No one's sure exactly when it happened because it was before the advent of recorded history. And in this supposedly scandalous bit of video, that is all these Border Patrol agents were doing. But never mind, that's not important now. We've got a hate machine to feed, damn it, and that thing needs a steady supply of fuel. So it took less than 3 hours for this nonsense to start being discussed in the White House briefing room, where our favorite press secretary, Lady Ginger McFirebush of Alabaster Farms, wasted no time in jumping on the hate train, saying that these images of horsemen riding horses was shocking and appalling and unacceptable, and it warrants a full and complete investigation. Not to be outdone, Vice President Black Mask Grim Reaper Ninja Lady, the California cackler, the person who is supposed to be the border czar, she organized her own hastily assembled press conference within 30 or so minutes after that, in which she made her first public remarks on border policy since all the way back in June, when she popped into the El Paso airport for 45 minutes and then said, "There, I've been to the border. You happy now?" But wait, I hear you saying, isn't 3 months between public remarks about something border related? Isn't that kind of a hell of a long time when that's supposed to be the number one thing in your policy portfolio? And you know what the answer to that question is? Never mind. That's not important now. The important thing is, it's that you know how deeply horrified and appalled Kamala Harris was to see these monstrously evil Latino white supremacist border agents riding horses in the same manner that men have been riding horses for at least the past 3 millennia. And if you think that's about all the half-baked virtue-signaling hyperbole you can take, then think again, because we're not even halfway through the batting order yet. We've still got the cleanup hitter standing in the on-deck circle, the Babe Ruth of manufactured, made-for-TV race grievance, our good friend Joy Reid, who hosts a nightly show on MSNBC called Everything is Racist, and So Are You, You Racist Bastard. Ms. Reid, who at last count still has 0 American ancestors, but just loves portraying herself as a stakeholder in the Black American historical experience, opened her show with a painfully long, stupefyingly incoherent soliloquy about how these awful, morally repugnant Border Patrol agents, in their willingness to publicly ride horses in the same manner that everyone rides a horse who has ever ridden a horse, how they remind us that we are still a nation defined by white supremacy, and we have not made any moral improvement, no progress, not even a little tiny bit, since the days when giving the lash to a fugitive slave was still legally protected behavior. And over at CNN, they felt left out by this point, so they got their official weightlifting correspondent, Mr. Fredo Cuomo, formerly known as the retarded little brother of the governor of New York, but now known as the retarded little brother of the disgraced former governor of New York, to look balefully into the camera and whine that he too was reminded of slavery when he saw this footage. Because if there's anybody who's a renowned scholar of antebellum U.S. history, it's the guy who wondered out loud on the air where in the Constitution it says that protest is supposed to be peaceful. Now hit the music, Jim Eagle, you magnificent no-pants-wearing bastard. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where whipping and lassoing illegal aliens sounds just about right to us. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And we need to talk about Australia, because it would seem that matters are coming to a head down there in the Anglosphere's first fascist biosecurity police state, which you may also recognize as the country where their prime minister is named That Fella Down Under, pal. Or at least, that's his name according to the semi-animated wax mannequin who masquerades as the President of the United States when he's not busy trying to figure out how these funny new little shiny records work. I bought a new turntable and everything, but I still don't hear any music. Screw this newfangled technology. What time does Gunsmoke come on? I spoke in Monday's video about the value of nonviolent resistance, and I spoke several weeks ago in the previous Australia video about how a fascist biosecurity police state is exactly what could potentially be awaiting us here in the United States unless we quickly find a way to rediscover our national moral courage. But I'm happy to report that down there in the once and future prison colony, it would seem the public health overlords have finally gone a bridge too far. And the straw that broke the wallaby's back, or the kangaroo's back, the dingo's back, whatever, was apparently the attempted imposition of a nationwide vaccine mandate for tradesmen and construction workers. The country's largest association of trade unions pushed back against the mandate, which is nice to see, since trade unions are so often in bed with tyrannical authoritarian governments here in the Anglosphere in the 21st century. So then the government doubled down, of course, and locked everyone out of their jobs. They literally shut down every construction site in the entire country. And since then, since the start of this week, there have been massive protests in the streets of every major city in Australia. You may have seen this bit of video that's been making the rounds in which a 70-year-old woman who isn't doing anything but protesting, which, last I checked, is supposed to be a basic civil right in Western liberal democracies. She's knocked to the ground by a couple of 200-something-pound riot cops in full body armor, and as she's laying there on the ground, prone and defenseless with a goddamn broken hip, one of these assholes, just for good measure, decides to spray a shitload of mace right in her eyes. And because, yeah, that totally is a proportionate response to a little old lady yelling at you. If you haven't seen the footage, you should go watch it. You should make yourself watch it, even though it's pretty tough to look at. And granted, it's not even the same country, but since fake news knows no national boundaries, contrast that image with the image of our Border Patrol agents on horseback trying to round up foreign nationals who are in the country in violation of our laws, which is their damn job after all, with the image of a lady, a senior citizen, on the streets of her own country where she pays the taxes, being beaten and manhandled and maced and rather grievously injured, just because she doesn't want to live in a fascist biosecurity police state, just because she wants to have the same rights that she's enjoyed for her entire life up to now, the rights that she thought was guaranteed by being a citizen of a Western liberal democracy and member of the British Commonwealth. If there's anything that causes government officials, government spokespeople, and national news show hosts to express shock and moral outrage, shouldn't it be the latter thing rather than the former? But that image, the image of a law-abiding little old lady being literally run over by the forces of a police state goon squad, those are the kind of images that cause people to wake the hell up and realize what is happening in their country. And that is exactly why nonviolent resistance to tyranny is more effective than violent resistance. Because with violent resistance, all you get is images of two opposing groups punching and kicking and beating one another. It's the image of an old woman with a broken hip on the ground, on her back, prone and defenseless, not resisting anyone, being sprayed in the face by a muscle-bound, body-armored thug in the name of public health authoritarianism run amok. That is the kind of image that creates positive change in the world. No amount of violent resistance can achieve the objective of a restoration of civil rights and sane public policy as well as that image can. But we need to talk also about the personal culpability of the individual police officers who are engaging in these monstrous acts of evil against their own countrymen and women, against the people they are supposed to work for, the people whose safety and security is supposed to be their professional duty. I talked about it in the previous Australia video when I was relating the story of how they sent a cop to an animal shelter to liquidate a mother dog and her litter of 8 puppies just so nobody would get any ideas about driving to the shelter and adopting them. Because following orders, or wanting to keep your job, or wanting to stay out of trouble, or avoid disciplinary action, it doesn't absolve you of the duty of basic moral decency as a human being. When your chief or your sergeant or your commander or whatever it's called in Australia, when they order you to drive to an animal shelter and shoot a bunch of puppies in the face, you have a good long time to think about whether that's something that you actually want to do. You have no shortage of opportunities between the time you receive the order and the time you're standing there about to squeeze the trigger and execute those puppies while their mother watches to decide, you know what? This is complete and utter madness. I'm not going to do it. I don't care about keeping my job that much that I am going to stand here and liquidate 9 dogs in the name of mitigating the spread of a stupid Chinese flu virus with a 99.7% survival rate. You'll have to get some other bastard to come and do it. If it means I get fired, go ahead and fire me. And it should be no different if you're a riot cop in full body armor who is bearing down on a 95-pound female senior citizen. With each step forward that you take, you have the chance to think, do I really want to put a forearm shiver on this little old lady, knock her down with all my might, bust her fucking hip, and then spray fucking mace all up in her eyes while she's laying on the ground injured? Is that why I signed up to be a police officer? To beat up senior citizens just because they were yelling their disapproval of an insane government policy? Do I want to have that on my conscience for the rest of my life? Do I want to be a man who acts as a violent enforcer of state tyranny? Or do I want to be a decent human being? We can see what decision these guys made, and it was the wrong one. But unfortunately, discussions about the police have become just as polarized, and consequently just as completely useless as discussions about abortion policy. There are only 2 polar opposite positions, and you have to pick one or the other. If you try to be pragmatic, to occupy the middle ground, to exercise any sort of discretion or nuance to find a third way, you just wind up with some extremist shrieking abuse at you. So on the one side, you've got the BLM Antifa position that says all cops are bastards. And on the other side, you've got Back the Blue, where all criticism of law enforcement officers is strictly verboten. And both of those positions are arbitrary bullshit, because most cops, the vast majority of cops, they are decent people of conscience and dedicated professionals. But some cops absolutely are bastards. Cops who execute puppies and beat up old ladies are bastards. Cops who act as goons and thugs, contrary to the law and contrary to basic human decency, to enforce the political will of some ruler or some regime, are bastards. Here in the United States, we have a lot of cops who are grappling with that very question right now. Do I choose to disobey orders I know are contrary to the oath I swore? Or do I choose to be a bastard? And it looks like these matters are coming to a head in New York City, where amazingly, for the first time ever, BLM has decided to protest against an actual, honest-to-God, racist government policy, rather than being just a Democrat Party goon squad, which I have to say is really unexpected, but quite refreshing. They must have finally noticed how badly their public approval numbers have tanked, or more likely they've noticed their donations drying up since the public perception of their group shifted from morally righteous protesters for racial justice to Marxist thugs who lionize violent criminals and burn and loot cities because it's fun. Here on this program, I told you from the first day Mayor Bill de Blasio, the artist formerly known as Warren Wilhelm, announced his vaccine passport plan, that it was a racist apartheid policy, because it is. When you're imposing a policy where 80% of white people are allowed to do whatever they please, but 65% of black people have their ability to go anywhere, to do anything, severely curtailed according to their unwillingness to be injected with an experimental drug and then submit their private medical records for inspection each time they want to buy groceries or eat at a restaurant or work out at a gym or go to a movie. You don't have to be of any certain political persuasion to recognize the fact that that is a racist apartheid policy. The amazing thing is that Bill de Blasio actually smoked so much weed that he didn't see what the result of this thing was going to be. And the result has been straight up racial profiling. Which is kind of hilarious when you think about it, because it's a policy authored by woke Democrats who are always lecturing conservatives and Republicans about how they are the ones who are the racists. But in everyday practical reality, it's created a status quo in New York City where white people, since they're overwhelmingly more likely to have taken the vaccine, are routinely allowed to enter establishments without being asked for their papers, while black people, who are far less likely to have taken the jab, are nearly always challenged to produce their stupid vaccine cards at the door. And don't get me wrong, policies like this are 100% evil, 100% unconstitutional, totally illegal on their face, because in America we don't make people show their papers in order to be allowed entry into any retail space or public venue. And even setting that aside, this ridiculous bullshit policy doesn't even do anything to advance its own stated goal of mitigating the spread of the Kung Pao sicken virus. But this law, this policy, has such a disproportionate racial impact. It has the practical effect of excluding a majority of black New Yorkers from a majority of public spaces. That even by the standards of the professional race hustlers, the people who falsely claim that any disproportionate racial impact of any public policy is evidence of an intrinsically racist system, it's still a racist policy. In fact, there's really no way you can slice this thing to where it's not an apartheid law. In terms of its practical real-world effect, it's the most brazen anti-black apartheid law anywhere in the world since the white minority lost power in South Africa about 30 years ago. So congratulations to you, Bill de Blasio. You may fancy yourself a woke Democrat, but you've managed to craft a political legacy for yourself that would cause Presidents de Klerk and Botha to double facepalm at your incredible lack of subtlety. And of course, if you're a New York City cop, now you're faced with the same conundrum that a lot of other cops are faced with. Do you want to be a cop who enforces a racist apartheid policy? A policy which, even if it wasn't unconstitutional, even if it didn't stand in stark opposition to the animating principles on which the American Republic was founded, would still be an insult to basic decency and morality? Is your career that important? Is your paycheck that important? Did you become a cop So you could enforce what is effectively a whites-only law? Because I suspect you didn't. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Today, Wednesday, 22 September 2021, your host is on the same page as Black Lives Matter. And I think it's fair to say that nobody could have pulled that off except an astonishingly dumb Democrat who smokes a superhuman amount of very powerful marijuana. Thanks for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Keep up the good work, Australia. See you Friday. Get off my lawn.